What's going on, guys? And welcome back to WWE Network and show where every single week I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of WWE Untold, titled That's Gotta Be Kane. Or more appropriately, That's Gotta Be Kane! That's Gotta Be Kane! That's Gotta Be Kane! In my best Vince McMahon voice. This was a great episode. Untold is one of the more, I would call it a hidden gem. I know there was already a section on the network called the Hidden Gem section. But this is one of the more underrated programs, I would say, on the WWE Network. They just did one about a month or so ago on Team Hell No and the untold story of Team Hell No, how they came together and the stuff going on behind the scenes at that time and everything else. And it was a great episode. They've done other ones on Sting's WWE debut about 5 years ago. It didn't air 5 years ago, but Sting's debut happened 5 years ago, which is amazing to think about in retrospect. They did one actually on the Hell in a Cell match between Mankind and The Undertaker from 1998, obviously the infamous Hell in a Cell match from King of the Ring that year. They did one on Eddie Guerrero's impact on SmackDown, and I believe they've done one or two more. They did one on the King of the Ring match between the street fight between Shane McMahon and Kurt Angle in 2001. Again, they've done a lot of cool ones, a lot of great ones in the last year or so. And this one was no exception, probably my favorite yet. And I think it might have been the longest too. This one clocks in at around 35 minutes. Now, usually they're like around 19, 20 minutes. This was a longer one, but rightfully so, because there was a lot to unpack here. And it's not just about Kane. I thought it would be focused all around Kane, just feature a sit down with him. But they featured a lot more people than just Kane. They talked to Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, obviously both of whom were involved in the first ever Hell in a Cell match at Bad Blood 1997, almost exactly 22 years ago, which again is insane. I'm 24 years old, so that match is almost as old as me, which is crazy. But they talked to Taker, they talked to Shawn Michaels, they talked to Kane, they talked to Bruce Pritchard, which was awesome, who was obviously a big creative influence behind the scenes at that point. But we kick off the episode with Kane talking about how he grew up in a small town about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of St. Louis. He played football growing up, but it wasn't until he suffered a serious injury that he found out that he couldn't play anymore. That dashed his hopes of ever being a professional football player, and his dream had always been to be a pro athlete. Of course, becoming a professional wrestler was likely never on his radar until the opportunity came about. He never really talked about that. I'm sure he has talked about it elsewhere. I have no idea how Kane, of all people, got into wrestling. He talks about his early gimmicks in WWE in a little bit, but he doesn't talk about how he landed upon pro wrestling. So maybe we'll get that in a full-length documentary on Kane at some point. But just to find, I never knew he played football. I mean, I guess it would make sense given his size, but I never knew that. He always thought, though, that those were just dreams, that his dreams were just that, dreams, until, he got the opportunity to compete at the WWE level. Anyway, going to a side story here for a second, Shawn Michaels and Taker are really, they're telling the story of Shawn Michaels and Taker in addition to Kane's debut, because that was really what that Cell match was all about. In order to truly appreciate that Kane debut that night, you also obviously have to know the backstory of that bout between Shawn Michaels and Undertaker at Bad Blood 1997. So they talk about Shawn Michaels and Taker both, talk about how they were on different levels, so to speak, in 1997. Shawn Michaels, Taker says, was a completely different person back then than who he is today. And they get along very well today, but that was not the case whatsoever 22 years ago. And Michael says, to put it lightly, they are, or were at that point, two very different personalities. Taker was very quiet, more Clint Eastwood-like, whereas Shawn Michaels was very boisterous, very outgoing in the wrong way possible, in the worst way possible. Very obnoxious, very annoying. That's just the type of person that he was at that point. But Taker did say, despite their differences, there was no one he would rather be in the ring with than Shawn Michaels. He says Shawn Michaels was ahead of his time, and he also praises his ability to tell a great story in the ring and his psychology as well. Undertaker talked about how, the darker side of his character, the dark persona that he portrayed and still portrays to this day over the course of his career, and how he kind of tapped into that darkness inside of him when he first debuted back in 1990. To the point where he would see kids cry when he came out to do his entrance. That's how scary his character was when he first debuted and arrived on the scene, over 25, almost 30 years ago now. But anyway, They talked about how McMahon was always against the idea of having these two face off prior to 1997. And they had been in the company together for, 7 years? That's a long time before they finally faced off one-on-one. Nowadays, you'll see dream matches happen boom, 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 like within the first 6 months of that person's arrival. For example, Kevin Owens hasn't even been on the main roster for 7 years. He's been only on the WWE main roster for 7 years, or for 4 years rather, and has already faced everyone from Shane McMahon to AJ Styles to John Cena to really all the big names in WWE. Goldberg, Taker at a house show, and that's only within 4 years. They kept Taker and Michaels apart for 7 years, but not because they were ever building towards a match between the two. Rather, it was because they never had any desire. Specifically, when I say they, I mean Vince. He never had any desire to book that match because they wanted to keep both guys strong. According to Bruce Pritchard, they were two very, huge personalities. One guy had to lose if they were to face off, so therefore avoid that altogether by not having them face off. So anyway, they decided to put it out there for a one-night only pay-per-view, an in-your-house show. It might have been the September pay-per-view, September 7th, 1997. I forgot what the name of the show was, but they faced off on that show. Match obviously ended in a no contest. And Michaels said it only made sense to do a rematch because it was around that time that he got with DX, he got with China, he got with Triple H, and it only made sense for them to feud with Taker because Taker was, the whole story was him trying to overcome the odds with Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels was the WWE champion to that point. Or no, was he? I don't think, was he? Was Shawn Michaels the champion? No, because Bret Hart was the champion. Bret Hart, I think, beat Taker to become the champion at SummerSlam. So then who was Bret Hart facing at that point? I have no idea. I forgot. But, I don't think... No, Michaels and Taker was a non-championship match in 97. Because Michaels cost Taker that WWE title at SummerSlam to Bret Hart. And then Michaels would win it from Bret Hart at Survivor Series. That's what happened. But anyway, so it only made sense for Taker to feud with DX at the, in the early stages of that stable forming. Cain, on the other hand, had debuted in WWE as Isaac Yankem DDS, and then he transitioned over to the role of Fake Diesel. He thought he would have a short career because both characters sucked, and he put his all into both characters. He tried to make it work. To no fault of his own, the characters flopped. Isaac Yankem was a terrible gimmick, and Fake Diesel was never going to work. It was one of those things where... where am I in my notes here? Where, Taker said that he was actually a really nice human being, but it was a case where he had to stand up for himself because he was too nice to the point where you had to say, listen, I'm not going to do this character, or I think we should do this, because if he kept taking these bad roles, he was going to indeed have a very short career for himself in WWE. So Cain kept a good attitude. He was professional, but Vince knew. It was one of those cases, Cain said, where Vince, was high on Cain. He liked his size, his strength, his in-ring ability, whatever, but he needed to find the right spot for him. And that's when Pritchard, of all people, pitched the idea for Undertaker to have a brother, an unknown brother he didn't know that he had, or a brother that he knew that he had that forgot about because he thought he died in a funeral home fire, in a funeral parlor fire years earlier. And Taker never went to go save him because he was told that he was dead. So, this is another thing I did not know. There's a lot of cool stories. Like usually on these Untold episodes, which are always very good, there's a lot of stories. Okay, I knew that. I've heard of that before, like the Charlie Sheen thing and the Team Hell No one. Like I knew that story. There's a lot of stories on this episode that I personally have never heard of, that I had never heard of prior to this point. So Cain says that his original name was supposed to be Inferno. That's a terrible fucking name, but I can definitely see Vince wanting to call him Inferno after wanting to call Steve Austin fucking Fang McFrost back in, 95, 96? That's so fucking stupid. But anyway, so they changed the Cain soon after. They kind of modeled it after Undertaker's original name, which was Cain the Undertaker. I think it was spelled K or C-A-I-N after like Cain and Abel, like the Bible story. And then they changed the spelling to Cain as in K-A-N-E. So that was it was an homage to Undertaker's original name years earlier, and after Bruce Pritchard's son, who was named Cain. And Bruce also told a cute little story that he put his son in a Cain mask, and his son must have already been born by that point, obviously, by 96, 97. But in his first public baby picture of Bruce's son, Cain, he was in a Cain mask in 1999, which is really funny. But anyway... the original concept art for the attire for Cain he looked like a superhero, and you can find it online. It's on this episode. But it was really interesting, and I've heard this story a million times before, and it was really fucking interesting, because I never knew, why did Cain wear a cape? If you look hard enough, you will find pictures of Cain wearing a fucking cape at house shows, and I don't know if he ever wore it on TV, but he was wearing a cape for a very short period of time, in either late 97, early 98. It might have been early 98. And Cain says here, Cain was like, why do I look like a superhero? Like, this doesn't really make any sense. Obviously being nice about it, being, fucking Glenn Jacobs, one of the nicest people on earth. Vince, being the genius that he was, said that because he had such a shattered ego and he was scarred and all these other things, he overcompensated for that by becoming a superhero. It was like, oh, I never really thought about it like that before, Cain said. And I thought that was really interesting too. Now, it still didn't make much sense for a supervillain to be wearing a cape. Like maybe Megamind or some shit like that, but Cain, the character, didn't really make much sense for him to be wearing a cape. They probably realized it looked goofy after a while, and they ditched it pretty quickly. They never said why they ditched it, but that's why he had the cape, Vince said, was because, or Cain said because of what Vince said, that he was overcompensating for a shattered ego. Very interesting. But anyway, he was watching Raw one day, and he heard his name. He heard Cain. It was like, holy shit, because Paul Bearer said Undertaker on an episode of Raw, I believe on June 30th, 97, he said, Undertaker, Cain is coming. He's alive. He's breathing like everyone else in this room. He's alive and he's coming for you. And this was months before he debuted. This is some long-term storytelling shit here. And remember, like, he debuted in October. This is almost 3-4 months ahead of time. And they didn't do the first match between the two until WrestleMania. Like another 6 months after that, which is crazy. But anyway, so going back to what I was originally talking about here. Where was I? Where am I in my notes? Where was I in my notes? So Taker called it very intriguing, really intriguing storytelling. So then the story shifted by the fall to Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and people kind of forgot about Cain because he was teased for a while in the summer of 97. And then Shawn Michaels cost, like I said earlier, Taker the WWE title at SummerSlam, so they transitioned into that feud for the fall, and Cain was kind of sort of forgotten about. Michaels then talks about the promos he was cutting at that point and how they were all over the place and how he presented himself. He was being a fucking asshole. And yeah, that was in character, but a lot of that was a shoot too. He talked the promo exchange that he had with Taker that night on Raw, and then he took the mic after Taker disappeared from the Titantron, and I think they were already off the air, but he took a mic and started burying, not like literally, but figuratively burying, he said. That was the word that he used. Undertaker. And this was all off the cuff. This was all off the script. It was unscripted. Pritchard was pissed. Vince was pissed. He called up Shawn Michaels a little later on and said that he was going to fine him $10,000. But he was also super high on it because he called it Attitude. Now, I don't think that was the turning point for the Attitude Era. I think that came a little later on. But it was the early seeds being planted of the Attitude Era, at least according to Pritchard and the story that he told here. Taker knew that despite how unprofessional Michaels was most of the time with a lot of this shit, he knew it would always pay off when they stepped in the ring together when that bell rang. So, Michaels pitched something similar to a cage match that he had seen in, I think, the NWA. It was either in the NWA or he called it, he referenced the Cajun Dome. It must have been the NWA or early WCW. I don't know. But he saw a cage match. I think he said Buzz Sawyer. I forgot who else he mentioned. But there was a cage match in one of those type of promotions where there was a lid on top of the cage. There was it was topped off. The cage wasn't just the steel cage, it had a top on it. And he thought that was really interesting. And in a typical WWE fashion, they had to take something so simple and make it larger than life, which is what turned into Hell in a Cell. So honestly, another thing I had no idea about. So that's Michael's side of the story. Maybe that's not true, but I find it hard to believe that anyone else would have come up with the idea for Hell in a Cell than Shawn Michaels himself after the story that he told here. So you can credit Jericho for creating the Money in the Bank ladder match. You can credit this guy for creating that. But it was Shawn Michaels who came up with the idea for Hell in a Cell. Very interesting. He knew that he wanted to be the first one to do anything, because if you can be the first one to do whatever, your name will live on forever. So he knew that he wanted to go to the top of the cell. Even though he probably wasn't supposed to, he knew that he had to do it. So the show was in St. Louis, pretty much in the hometown of Cain. And Cain, the day of or the day before that weekend, that he was set to make his debut at this pay-per-view, get his big break. As he said, he was with his family, he was with his friend, and his friend offered to pick him up and drive him to the arena. So his car was shit, and he said calling it a clunker would be being generous. Cain says, talking about his friend's car. The car obviously starts smoking, breaks down, of course, on their way to the arena. And this was an hours before showtime. This was like 9 o'clock in the morning. But Cain is still freaking out because this is one of the biggest days of his life up to this point, and his fucking friend's car just broke down. He's so pissed. So his friend's friend picked him up, dropped him off for the arena, got there with plenty of time to spare, but still, his day was not off to the strongest start. So anyway, Taker and Michaels talk about having a WrestleMania caliber match, or that's what Cain says. He calls it a WrestleMania caliber match, which it was. It probably is still to this day, 22 years later, it probably still is to this day, the greatest Hell in a Cell match of all time that I've ever seen. I think there's really no topping the original. I've said that for years now, and I think it's hard to disagree. That is the greatest Cell match of all time. Now, I have my personal favorites, but that one is amazing. Anyway, Shawn Michaels said that he wanted to take the best beating from Undertaker. Really make this thing special. Not like a Hulk Hogan overselling beating, but really get his ass kicked. Because that's what people pay to see. People wanted to pay to see him get his ass kicked by The Undertaker, and that's exactly what happened. Cain calls the match unbelievable. Taker says that the Cell gave him more opportunities to brutalize Shawn Michaels. But they needed to make fans believe that Michaels could somehow get out alive. So the Cell broke open. They went to the outside. They climbed on top. And that was when Michaels started bleeding. And Michaels said that he has this innate ability to start bleeding out of nowhere, that he can make himself bleed really easily, I guess. And he says, and I quote, bleeding just ups the intensity in anything, which is absolutely accurate. I completely agree with that. It's better when it's not overdone. But again, back then, blood was not done all the time. So in this circumstance, it was perfect. And a lot of those early Cell matches had a lot of fucking blood. Triple H busted himself open in almost every Hell in a Cell match that I watched from that point forward. I watched all the early Hell in a Cell matches. I've seen them a million times before. Triple H always was the first one to fucking bleed. Kind of modeling himself after his idol, Ric Flair. But anyway, Taker praises this awesome camera shot that was from within the Cell, from underneath Taker and Shawn when they were on top of the Cell. And Taker was kind of like grinding Shawn Michaels' face up against the Cell structure, underneath the actual Cell, on top of it. And the camera caught this great shot of Taker doing that while the blood was dripping down from Michaels' face on top of the camera. It really was a great shot, and Taker loved that. Taker called it a beautiful train wreck. And Cain also said it was as close to perfection as you could possibly get. And Taker said he was really proud of that match. Cain says he didn't want to mess it up. He didn't want to fuck it up. He really wanted this thing to go off without a hitch, and it did. That was the first time he said that he had ever heard his entrance music. He didn't hear it prior to that point, and it still is some of the greatest entrance music to this day. And he's had some cool songs since then. The one with the lyrics about 15 years ago was great, and the song that he has now is cool. It's kind of a remix of his original theme, but that original theme will still give me goosebumps all these years later. It's so fucking good. He didn't obviously hear, he said, Vince going, "That's gotta be Kane! That's gotta be Kane! That's gotta be Kane!" on commentary, but he did hear the crowd going nuts. And Michael said that was the only way you could end that match. After everything they put themselves through, that was the perfect way to end that match. The only way to end it. And he praises Kane's presence and what he brought to the table that night. Pritchard says that Undertaker's eye contact with Kane was what made that special. Because he talks about how, despite not seeing someone for years and years, he relates it to an actual experience, not something with him, but he relates it to real life where he says, you may not see someone for a long time. Years and years and years may go by, and they may look incredibly different, but when you look in that person's eyes, there's a connection there. And that's what Taker had with Kane, despite the fact that in storyline, he hadn't seen him for probably decades. And that was what made that moment really fucking special. Michael says, you hit a home run when the crowd gasps and you're like, oh, and they go, oh man, I can't believe he's going to win. Like, oh man, he's going to win. Because people really didn't want Shawn Michaels to win. And Shawn Michaels went undefeated against The Undertaker up until 2009. They had that series of matches in late 97, early 98, including the casket match. Shawn Michaels either won them all or they went to a DQ, no contest, whatever. So Taker never ended up beating Michaels throughout that entire feud. And Taker said that, obviously they're biased, but they did something that night that would stand the test of time. They knew even then that they did something that would stand the test of time. And he also said that there aren't many people, if any other people, that could do what they did that night. And Cain says, obviously being biased as well, he admits, that it is the greatest debut in history. And honestly, I completely agree. Like, some people have come close. Some people have had some awesome debuts over the years, even in recent years. But no one, I think, will ever top the debut that Cain had in 1997 at Bad Blood. They then talk about where they are now, what's going on, stuff like that. Pritchard says that Shawn Michaels is a completely different person now. It's like a whole 180 from where he was, 20 years ago to where he is now. Michaels says that he wouldn't change anything about his journey. Everything happens for a reason, and no one feels more good and at peace in their heart than Michaels does because of probably what he went through all those years ago. And they also talk about how Cain praises Undertaker, saying that Taker was willing to take a chance on him, and it worked. And Cain says that everything he's achieved since that point over the past 22 years all dates back to that debut, and it all stems from that one night and how miraculous it was and how it really went off as perfectly as possible. And Taker also praises the person and the wrestler that Cain is, and saying how phenomenal of a performer he is and how great of a person he is. You could tell these guys really do enjoy each other's presence, how much they really mean to each other, which really just goes to show that when they both get inducted into the Hall of Fame someday, Cain probably sooner rather than later, a lot like Mark Henry went in a year or two ago, Taker should absolutely be the one to do the induction. I know people may say, Daniel Bryan because of Team Hell No, and Paul Bearer would have been nice had he not passed away, obviously, a few years ago, about 6 years ago at this point. But Taker has got to be that guy. Their careers are so synonymous with each other that there really is no other perfect person than Undertaker to do the induction, in my opinion, and vice versa. Anyway, so to close out the episode here, a really emotional story being told by Cain. And he ends up crying over it. And honestly, it almost got me teary-eyed too. So Cain recalls being at a concert in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where he's the mayor of now. Not Knoxville, but I think it is Knoxville. I think he's the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee. But anyway, he was there at a concert years and years ago, like maybe not that long ago, but a few years ago. And he said that a woman and daughter ran up to him while he was at the concession stand, getting himself a soda and his wife a soda. And while he was there, this woman and her daughter run up to him with a picture on her phone of Cain and this woman's son, who was in the hospital. Cain had just visited him shortly before that, and it was the last picture he ever took. And it was with Cain, because he passed away from, probably cancer. And, it's like those things that WWE shows on TV, like with the Make-A-Wish kids and stuff, like not just Make-A-Wish, but like when they visit people in the hospital, and it kind of gives them that burst of energy that they need going through a dark time. Cain provided that for this one child, and she thanked him for that, and he got really emotional just talking about it, and he said he really values that. He really values that connection that he has to the crowd, fans, kids, stuff like that. So a really emotional note to end on, but I loved it. I thought it was great, and I almost, again, kind of got choked up just listening to that story from Cain. But this was an awesome episode. This was really, really good. The 35 minutes fly by. If you're a big Attitude Era nut, Cain nut, Michaels nut, Taker nut, a lot of nuts there. Not to sound sexual or anything, but there's a lot of nuts there, I guess. Then this episode is for you. It's a really good episode of WWE Untold, really kind of giving great detail about Cain's debut and everything that went into that first ever Hell in a Cell match, how it came about, the cape, the idea behind the cell, the idea behind Cain's character, who was responsible for each idea. Some really interesting stuff here. And again, maybe this is all public knowledge. Maybe they've talked about it elsewhere. I've never heard these stories before. A lot of these stories I've never heard. So I thought it was awesome, and I really, really enjoyed this. Honestly, made me want to go back and watch that first ever Hell in a Cell match again. And I've seen it a million times. I owned that Hell in a Cell anthology DVD that they put out about 10 years ago that features practically every Hell in a Cell match from the first one to Taker and Batista in 07. And I say practically because they literally include every Cell match, including the few that happened on Raw that ended in like a no contest. They included those, except for the Big Boss Man Undertaker one from, 99 at WrestleMania 15? That's how bad that match was. It was so bad they did not even include it on a DVD that features every Cell match of all time up to that point. But it's a great DVD. I used to watch it every year before the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, and I'll probably go back and watch some of those matches again, including that one, because it's so fucking good. Like I said earlier, it probably, not even probably, is, I would say, arguably the greatest Cell match they've ever done, and likely won't ever be topped. And, they've had some good ones in recent years. There's been some great ones. I really like Shawn Michaels and Triple H from, I think it was Bad Blood as well, 2004, if I'm not mistaken. I love Triple H Batista from Vengeance 05. That might be my favorite Hell in a Cell match, to be honest with you. That one's really fucking good. But that one will never be topped. So, I'm looking forward to Hell in a Cell, and I'll probably rewatch that first ever Hell in a Cell match with Kane's debut back with likely Alexis in the next couple of days or week or so. I don't think she's ever seen it before, so to kind of relive that and surprise her with the Cain debut will be pretty cool. But anyway, guys, check out this episode of WWE Untold on the WWE Network. You are sure to enjoy it. Just tremendous stuff. So anyway, guys, thank you for checking out this video. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for daily content. We have new network and shows going up all the time. I think there's a new photo shoot tonight after Raw as I speak, featuring Christian, I can't do the voice, but I think it's airing tonight after Raw. Looking forward to that, and I'll likely watch it / review it tomorrow here on Network and Chill. We also have hashtag AskGSM going up every single Wednesdays, Wrestle Rant Radio excerpts on Thursdays, Fridays, new Network and Chills, Wrestle Rant videos, old episodes of Wrestle Rant Radio, interviews, miscellaneous content, live streams. Went live yesterday for a brief period. It cut out after about 20 minutes, which pissed me off. I don't know if the full one will ever be available. I talked for like 20 minutes about Glow, and it got cut off, which sucked. But anyway, check out that video when you get the time as well. Anyway, guys, have a great rest of your week. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.